Okay, here we go. How many years? 15. Wow. We'll do this presentation, then we'll take a short break for milk and cookies. Break. I'd like to introduce Professor Michael Harvey, who's been here for 15 years at the college. He's part-time my boss. Not that he's part-time. Every once in a while he asks me to teach a class for him, and I'm always honored to do so. Mike's specialty is leadership. He's written quite a bit about it. He's got some really neat stuff out there, and he's been gracious enough to offer to come in and talk about helping develop leadership within your team. Dr. Michael Harvey.
Thank you.
Folks, can you hear me okay?
Excellent. It's a pleasure to be here. It's really impressive to see all of you here. I'm going to talk sort of a big picture perspective on leadership. And you're free to figure out whether it relates to and maps onto the things you struggle with every day. I think we'll leave time at the end for questions if you want to kind of challenge me. How do I connect that to my daily challenges or the daily challenges of my students? Anybody here from New York City? Anybody a St. John's University graduate? Because I'm going to start with the St. John's story. So it's not rowing, it's basketball. But the great Hall of Fame basketball coach at St. John's University, Lou Carnesecca, over the course of his long career, loved to tell a story about when he was starting out, an assistant at St. John's. And he was an assistant to this great legendary coach from the 30s and the 40s, Joe Lapchick, who in his day was a great center, a great St. John's coach, became a great Knicks coach. One day, in the middle of a tough season, players weren't getting it, they weren't buying in, the team was losing, and the young Carnesecca said to Lapchick, why don't you just get rid of a couple of the players? Lapchick put his arm around the young Lou Carnesecca's shoulder and said, son, anybody can do that. It's your job to make them better. I've always loved that story because that's the real challenge in coaching, to take the folks you're working with and bring out their best. And that's a little bit of what we're talking about today. What I have on the screen is simply a copy of your one-page handout. So I don't have a lot of slides, just that one page. You can follow along on the screen, you can follow it on paper. Down at the bottom of the page there's a web link to my profile that's linked to this as a PDF too, and some contact information. The idea of making them better brings up a confession. I'm a Washington Wizards fan. I grew up in Bethesda, close to DC. And that's been pretty tough this year. But they're getting, in that magic coaching word, they're getting better. So as luck would have it, I was reading about last night's convincing win, 4th home win in a row for the Wizards over the Timberwolves. And there's this great quote from their Brazilian center. It's on your sheet again. Past is the past. We're not going to change that. Thank you. We learned a lot of things in the past, and now we've got to think about the present and future. Still a lot of games, and we need wins. Play together, know each other more, and create more chemistry. That's what we need to do. It's a great quote. It's not about X's and O's or basketball. It's about people working together, and it's about learning. And I think in a lot of ways, whether you're talking a team, a company, any kind of group of people, which is where leadership happens. Leadership really happens in groups. Sometimes it's you and one person, but the real context for leadership is a group that you're trying to help get better. Right? The work of groups, at its heart, is applied learning. Right? Learning to work together, understanding the goal and what it takes to get there, learning about the challenges and opportunities in your competitive environment, learning your competitors' strengths and weaknesses. Some of that may sound familiar from a strategic management course in business, if anybody here studied business, right? Lots of the ways that we study and can learn about leadership overlap different fields. I draw on business, psychology, literature, sociology, history. There are leadership lessons everywhere. Making friends who can help you, learning to trust your teammates, maybe a harder one, learning to trust yourself, learning to listen to and accept criticism without getting all prickly and rejecting it, learning how to be true to you at your best. So if that's the work of the group, if the work of the group is applied learning, not learning for its own sake, as wonderful as that can be, and I'm a professor at a little liberal arts college in this, this heavenly little retreat, but it's not learning for its own sake, it's learning to help us work better, whatever the work of the group. So if that's the work of the group, what's the work of leadership? Leaders spark and support learning within the group. This is the second half of the handout. Leaders ask questions and help group members arrive at shared Action-oriented answers. Action-oriented answers. It's not a philosophy class. It's not answers for their own sake. It's not the perfect answer. It's an answer that makes a difference now in the time frame and with the resources that you have to deal with your challenges. Right. The first two questions, and I'm going to give you 7 questions that I think kind of sum up the main challenges of what leaders have to do for groups. Right. The first 2 questions are the biggies. They're the vision and the plan. They're the mountain and the journey. Right. That first big vision question is, where are we going? Where are we going? It's a dream-like question. It's an aspirational question. It's an exciting question. In the words of a great leader like a Martin Luther King, he can paint a picture of your destination that excites you, that awakes you to new possibilities, that changes your sense of what's possible. Not all visions are that glorious, right? Within the domain of athletics, the where are we going is usually the championship. Right? But that is the first big question of leadership. Where are we going? And of course, if that's the poetry, if that's the excitement, if that's the passion, coming right alongside of it is something a lot less exciting, but just as important. How do we get there? Right? If where are we going is the poetry of leadership, how do we get there is the prose. It's the plan. It's the inventory. It's the step-by-step process. It's kids running up and down stadium steps as the exercise and the discipline that they have to do for months outside of the glory. So those are the big questions, but we can't stop there. And sometimes leadership literature just stops with those big questions. But it's not enough. It's leaving out a lot. Right? There are 3 questions that you have to ask to help ensure that those big answers actually fit your group. Right? Because having a vision and having a plan means nothing if they don't map onto your people. Leadership is never about the leader. It's always about the group. So the questions and the answers to the questions, it doesn't really matter what the leader believes. What matters is what the group believes. Right? So you have to ask 3 questions about the group. The first one is an identity question. Who are we? Who are we? You can look at countless stories of successful leaders who begin by figuring out who they're working with. Has anybody here read Michael Abrashoff's excellent book about leadership in the Navy, It's Your Ship? Great book, at least in my opinion. I've talked to Navy folks who get pissed off at how anti-bureaucratic he is. Abrashoff took over a very low-performing ship with 310 sailors. He interviewed 5 a day until he had interviewed everybody. He talked to every single sailor on his ship. He wanted to learn who his sailors were. He knew he couldn't really think a lot about where are we going to go, what are we going to do, how are we going to turn this ship around, until he knew who he was working with. So who are we is a huge question. The second question is, where are we? What is our competitive environment? Right? If you're going to be a rowing coach, you need to understand, or if you're going to be any kind of a leader, a marketing manager, a president of the United States, you've got to know your constraints, your competitive environment. What are the possibilities out there? For a president like Barack Obama, he's got to understand the balance of power between the White House, Congress, the Supreme Court. Right? If he doesn't know all that stuff, he will not succeed as a leader. It's a totally different dimension of thinking about, but it's just as important. So who are we is about us, the members of our group. Where are we is about our world. Just as important to know about. And then the third question, really a reality check question, and when you're struggling, boy, do you hate to ask it. How are we doing? How are we doing? It's a question that if you're in charge of a struggling program, I'm on the school board here in Kent County, Maryland, and we're not doing so great out of 24 school systems in Maryland. So that's an uncomfortable question to ask, how are we doing? But you have to ask it. You have to ask it. And that goes back to the basic idea of leading as asking and sparking questions. You have to be realistic about things, right? If you're going to paint a beautiful dream, the point is not the dream, the point is making it real. The point is making it real. So those are the 3 reality check questions. But to ensure that all this Q&A that you're doing becomes part of the shared DNA, the shared culture of the group, the leader needs to think empathetically about 2 connection questions that every single member of the group is always asking. The first question is, why should I care? Right? Leaders always have more at stake in the grand plan, the big picture, than individual members. Right? For most of us, subordinate members of a group, we can just do our own little piece of work, and to some extent, we wish the group well, but at that level of leadership, there's lots of things going on that we can't pay attention to. We don't know all the stuff that the leaders know. It's not really our day-to-day concern. And it's fair, because we have a lot of day-to-day challenges. that leaders don't have. So leaders have to put themselves in the position of that individual member of the group. Right? And it's common for leaders to get so wrapped up in the big picture and the vision that they kind of forget to connect with regular members of the group, athletes on a team, employees at a company. Right? Why should I care? If you as a leader cannot elicit a strong, convincing, real feeling answer to that question, well, then your plan stays a plan in a book on a shelf. Right? And the last question is, do I understand? We live in a world of complexity. We pay leaders at the top level, maybe not so much athletic coaches, we pay leaders at the top level a lot of money to manage that complexity, to simplify it in sensible ways, to bring order to what seems to be chaos, and to create kind of workable, simple plans. Right? So leaders spend a lot of their time simplifying, drilling vast amounts of information down to bullet point plans. Right? But we don't do that. We're enmeshed in the details of our own work. So there's a structural gap between the ongoing simplification that leaders are engaged in and the messy reality of where we're at. We know more details about our piece of the organization than a leader ever knows. So leaders have to figure out how to bridge that gap. And when you look at successful leaders, they figure out how to convey some important piece of simplicity in a slogan, in a dream, in an image, in a phrase that people learn. Leaders learn how to simplify in a way that connects with people. So, those are the 7 questions that I want to suggest all leaders in athletics, in church groups, in business, in education. You show me a group with a leader, or leadership, multiple leaders. I'll show you folks struggling with these 7 questions. The 2 big questions, the vision and then how to get there. 3 reality check questions. Who are we? What's our identity? What's our competitive environment? How are we doing right now? You'll find that great organizations like Toyota excel at hunting the answers to those questions down. And then when they find answers, once again, it's not a class. You don't stop there. You translate the answers into action. And then 2 empathy questions, you could say, are connection questions. Because a group is never just a group, it's a bunch of people. It's a bunch of individuals. And every individual can check out at any time. Okay, that's the framework. I want to leave you with the thought that asking questions is hard. Finding real answers is even harder. I think it takes patience, humility, and courage. Because in a lot of ways, this model of leadership goes against our expectation that the leader is the person with the answers. That's what we expect. Leaders know, right? That's what we expect. When we're kids, the leaders we look up to are our parents. And when we're little, it never occurs to us that sometimes they're as confused and uncertain as we are, right? But even as we get older, we kind of assume that coach knows. Coach will know what to do, right? If you're a coach, you figure my athletic director or the college president's going to know what to do, right? Built into the role is this sense of authority, this reassurance to folks, you can trust me for the answers. And that's great. That seems to be hardwired into our psychology. But when you start looking at leadership itself, leaders are in a constant cauldron of chaos, change, complexity. Things are topsy-turvy. An important part of your organization leaves. A rule is changed. New technology emerges. The environment, the makeup of your group, the nature of why people do what they're doing for your organization, it's always changing, it's always in flux. And if you think about it, it's really not that surprising that, to some extent, all that confidence and assurance and answers, it's the final product of a very difficult process of exploration, wondering, thinking, with a lot of anxiety and uncertainty. And when you look at the stories of great leaders, it's fascinating to see those moments of spiritual turmoil and mental uncertainty as they look for the right path forward. And I think for any leader today, the right path forward has to consist of confronting these questions and figuring out answers. Again, not answers for you as an individual, answers that resonate with your people. We have a couple of minutes, so I'll say something about this. So how do you do this? Do you ask the question and then impose the answers? You could. That's what Moses tries to do in the Old Testament, right? And when people challenge Moses in the Old Testament, it doesn't go well for them. The earth tends to swallow them up. Right? So that's one leadership model. that the questions are there, but some combination of Moses and his big helper God, they got all the answers, they got you covered, it's fine, it's solid. In today's world, that's not what we really expect, right? Once you start thinking about the challenges our organizations face, you realize no leader can know it all. The best you can do as a leader is to create structures, routines, and a culture that embraces learning together. And will embrace making mistakes, getting better, improving. If the Washington Wizards can do it, I think anybody can. Last night, they climbed out of the basement in the NBA. They're not the worst team in the NBA anymore by record. So, all right, that's my talk. You can find out a lot more about some of the texts that I use or some additional thoughts on this if you go visit my profile, which is on the bottom of the handout. But I think I'll turn it over to questions now. Yes, sir.
So, how would you suggest trying to not implement it, but like talk to your team about these kind of questions? You suggest a direct approach where it's you ask these questions literally, write them down, and talk to the team, or is it something you think you should do indirectly and over time so that they think about it on their own without having to have, being forced to make them think about it?
So I'll answer it. I'll come at your question by taking a piece of it, maybe, right? I was thinking that the focus here would be more, not simply all the members of your team, but your most motivated, most bought-in members, your captains, right? The young people on your team that you're trying to develop as leaders, right? I think with those leaders, lots of young people believe through hard work all is possible, and it's that simple, right? And I think that one necessary part of leadership, what Lou Carnesecca went through at St. John's with Joe Lapchick, what every one of you has gone through is sometimes hard work isn't enough. There's something else that I have to bring to this particular problem. So I don't know about every single member of the team. I don't know about that. But I think that with your leaders, the people that you've given some authority to on the team or that the team has chosen as their leaders, I think it's perfectly appropriate and I think an important part of their development as student athletes to engage them in these kinds of questions. Right? You could even tell them to go do this with new members of the team. Who are we? Who are we can be explored. Well, let's put it this way. If you simply ask a bunch of, say, new athletes to your team, they're not going to know who we are. Asking that question reminds you as a coach, I should teach my team, my current players, the history of this team, the traditions of this team. It's one of the greatest ways for people to start to care more about an organization, to learn about its great history, to learn about the heroes and the achievements of the past. So, to some extent, we may simply engage folks in these questions, right? From another perspective, the questions can help us as leaders figure out, I need to expand my organization's members' sense of who they are, right? Enrich their affiliation to this organization, to this team, by connecting them to the greatness of the past, right? But yeah, I think you could probably ask these questions of just athletes straight up, right? But you may have to bring something to that to deepen some of their understanding. Right? I think you also have to be cautious not to superficially ask these questions. If you ask, how are we doing? It's a very scary question. When Jack Welch became CEO of General Electric in 1981, he was very proud to introduce something that they called workouts. And they were intensive 3-day sessions at a particular division, like nuclear turbines or something, right? Or the energy division. And a lot of folks, a couple hundred folks would gather in a room. The general manager would sit there, and there'd be some higher up behind them. Everybody else, fire any question you want. And the person had to answer the question. Now, they could say, I'll get back to you on that if they didn't know, but they had to get back. They couldn't turn around and ask their boss what the answer was. And there was no filter on the questions. That really helped change the culture at General Electric. And it uncovered a lot of problems that people were afraid to talk about. Talking about problems is scary. It's very threatening to people. Psychologically, it feels so intimate to talk about problems honestly. So I think that's something, you study companies like Toyota, they're excellent at it. They can kind of depersonalize it, so the problem is not, talking about the problem is not a judgment about you.
Mike, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Greatly appreciate it.